Sometimes the hardest truth in a relationship isn't that someone stopped caring. It's realizing that the signs were there long before you were ready to accept them. You keep replaying the conversations in your head. You look at her last message and wonder what she meant. You notice that she doesn't seem as excited to see you anymore, but then one day she gives you a warm smile, and suddenly you think, maybe everything is fine. And that's where confusion begins, because when you care deeply about someone, your mind doesn't always search for the truth. Sometimes it searches for hope. You remember the good moments, the late night conversations, the laughter, the attention she used to give you. And when her behavior changes, you tell yourself there must be an explanation. Maybe she's busy. Maybe she's stressed. Maybe she's going through something. Maybe she just needs space. And sometimes those explanations are completely valid. But what happens when these moments stop being occasional and become a pattern? What happens when the woman who once seemed excited to hear from you starts becoming distant, unavailable, and emotionally disconnected? That's when you have to stop looking at one isolated moment and start looking at the entire pattern, because one delayed message doesn't tell you much. One quiet day doesn't tell you much. One canceled plan doesn't automatically mean she's lost interest, but repeated behavior can tell you something important. And today, we're going to look at 5 behaviors that may appear when a woman is no longer romantically interested in a man, not because every woman behaves exactly the same way, not because one sign is absolute proof, but because when several of these behaviors repeatedly appear together, they can give you information that your emotions may be trying to ignore. And the 5th sign is especially important, because sometimes the biggest clue isn't what she does, it's what she stops doing. So let's begin. The first thing you may notice is that you stop feeling like a priority in her life. Now, let's be careful here. Being busy doesn't automatically mean someone doesn't care. People have careers, families, responsibilities, stress, personal problems. Sometimes life genuinely gets in the way. The difference is not whether she is busy. The difference is whether there is still some effort to maintain the connection. When someone genuinely values a relationship, they usually find some way to communicate that value. It might not always be a long conversation. It might not always be a date. Sometimes it's simply a message saying, "Today is crazy, but I'll call you tomorrow." Sometimes it's making another plan after canceling one. Sometimes it's remembering something important you told them. The point isn't perfection. The point is reciprocity. But when interest begins to fade, but you may notice that the effort becomes increasingly one-sided. You're always the one asking when she's free. You're always the one suggesting plans. You're always trying to keep the connection alive. And every time you reach out, there seems to be another reason why she can't make time. At first, you excuse it. Then you excuse it again. And eventually, you realize something uncomfortable. She seems to have time for the things she genuinely wants to do, but somehow there is consistently no space for you. Again, this isn't about comparing yourself to every activity in her life. People deserve flexibility, and relationships shouldn't become a competition for someone's time. But if you repeatedly feel like an afterthought, that's information. And one of the biggest mistakes a man can make at this stage is responding to reduced interest by increasing his effort dramatically. He sends more messages. He gives more attention. He buys gifts. He becomes constantly available. He tries harder to prove his value, but attraction and connection cannot be negotiated like a business deal. You cannot force someone to feel something simply by giving more. Sometimes giving more to someone who is consistently giving less only creates emotional exhaustion. So instead of asking, "What else can I do to make her prioritize me?" ask yourself, is there actually mutual effort here? That question can save you months of confusion. And once you start paying attention to effort, you'll notice something else. Because when interest fades, it's not only time that changes. Communication often changes too. The second sign is that the communication starts feeling completely one-sided. Think about what a healthy conversation usually feels like. You send a message. She responds. She adds something to the conversation. Maybe she asks you a question. Maybe she tells you something about her day. Maybe she sends you something because it reminded her of you. There's movement, there's energy, there's curiosity. The conversation doesn't have to be romantic every second. It simply feels mutual. But when someone becomes increasingly disengaged, communication can begin to feel like you're pulling a heavy object uphill. You ask a question. She gives a short answer. You ask another short answer. You try to introduce a new topic. Nothing. You make a joke. No engagement. You tell her something interesting. She barely responds. And suddenly you're sitting there wondering what happened. You start analyzing punctuation. You analyze emojis. You analyze response times. You wonder whether that okay meant something. You wonder whether she was annoyed. You wonder whether you should send another message. And eventually, communication becomes less about enjoying each other and more about trying to keep something alive that isn't naturally moving anymore. That's an important distinction, because a person can be a terrible texter and still care deeply about you. Someone can take hours to respond because they're working. Someone can have a difficult week. So don't turn a single delayed reply into a psychological diagnosis. Look for the larger pattern. Does she eventually reconnect? Does she show interest when you talk? Does she contribute? Does she make an effort in other ways? Or are you consistently carrying the entire interaction? If you are always the person restarting the conversation, always creating topics, always reaching out, and always trying to revive the connection, then the problem may not be that you haven't found the right words. The problem may be that the other person simply isn't investing at the same level, and that's painful to accept, because when you care about someone, you naturally want to believe there's a perfect message that can bring back the old connection. So you write something clever, you wait, you send another message, you try harder. But sometimes the healthiest message is no message at all, not as a manipulation, not as a strategy to make her chase you, but as an opportunity to stop carrying a relationship by yourself. And that leads directly to the third sign, because communication reveals something important. Who is actually initiating the connection? The third sign is that she rarely initiates anything anymore. Imagine that you stop for a moment. You don't disappear dramatically. You don't play games. You don't try to make her jealous. You simply stop being the person responsible for starting every interaction. No constant good morning messages, no repeated calls, no endless invitations, no constantly asking, when are you free? And then you observe what naturally happens. Does she reach out? Does she wonder how you're doing? Does she send something that reminds her of you? Does she suggest seeing you? Does she try to continue the connection? Or does everything become completely silent? That silence can be difficult because it forces you to confront something your effort was previously hiding. Maybe the relationship wasn't moving because both people were moving toward each other. Maybe it was moving because one person was constantly pushing it forward. And there's a major difference between those two situations. Healthy connection doesn't require perfectly equal effort every single day. One person might carry more during a difficult week. The other might need more support at another time. That's normal. The concern is a long-term pattern where one person is always pursuing and the other person is consistently receiving. If you constantly have to create every opportunity for connection, you may eventually need to ask whether you're experiencing mutual interest or simply maintaining a one-sided dynamic. And here's where self-respect becomes important. You don't need to conduct an experiment on her. You don't need to calculate how many hours you should wait before replying. You don't need to become cold just to get a reaction. You don't need to manipulate her attention. Simply live your life, give the relationship room to breathe, and see whether both people naturally participate, because genuine interest doesn't have to be forced into existence. And sometimes when you stop forcing the connection forward, the truth becomes much easier to see. But there is another layer that words and messages don't always reveal. Sometimes the most revealing information is happening right in front of you, in her tone, her energy, her physical presence. And that's where the fourth sign comes in. The fourth sign is a noticeable shift in emotional and physical warmth. Now, body language should always be interpreted carefully. A woman crossing her arms doesn't automatically mean she's rejecting you. Looking away doesn't automatically mean she's uninterested. Being quiet doesn't automatically mean anything about attraction. Context matters. Personality matters. Culture matters. The situation matters. But when physical and emotional distance becomes part of a larger repeated pattern, it can be worth paying attention to. Think about the difference between someone who seems comfortable around you and someone who seems consistently eager to create distance. When someone feels connected to you, there is often some natural warmth. They may smile when they see you. They may maintain comfortable eye contact. They may lean into the conversation. Their voice may become more engaged. They may seem relaxed in your presence. Again, none of these things individually proves romantic attraction, but together they can create a general feeling of openness. Now imagine that feeling slowly disappears. Her conversations become colder. Her expressions become more neutral. She seems distracted whenever you're together. She frequently looks at her phone. She positions herself farther away. The playful energy disappears. The warmth that used to be there seems noticeably reduced. And you can feel the difference without anyone saying a word. That's what makes this sign so powerful, because sometimes your mind is waiting for us a sentence like, I don't feel the same way anymore. But human relationships don't always end with a dramatic announcement. Sometimes emotional distance arrives gradually. The laughter becomes less frequent. The conversations become shorter. The enthusiasm disappears. The connection becomes more formal, and you keep asking yourself why. The answer may not always be that she has lost interest. There could be many explanations. But if the emotional distance keeps appearing alongside reduced communication, reduced effort, and reduced availability, it's reasonable to recognize that something in the relationship has changed. And you don't need to accuse her. You don't need to demand an explanation. You don't need to turn it into an argument. You simply need to acknowledge what you're experiencing, because denial doesn't protect your heart. It only delays the moment when you have to deal with reality. And now we come to the fifth sign. This one can be even more revealing than delayed texts or distant body language. Because sometimes the clearest sign is not that she is doing something negative. It's that she stops creating opportunities for the relationship to move forward. Think about it. A connection needs opportunities, time together, conversations shard, experiences, moments of emotional closeness, plans, curiosity, a sense that both people are moving somewhere together. When a woman is interested in exploring a relationship, she may naturally participate in creating those opportunities. She may suggest something you could do together. She may tell you about her schedule. She may mention something she'd like to experience with you. She may make it easier for the connection to continue. But when romantic interest declines, you may notice the opposite. Plans become vague. Everything is maybe. There is no alternative date after a cancellation. Invitations remain unanswered. One-on-one opportunities repeatedly become difficult. Conversations stay on the surface. The relationship feels stuck, and you find yourself doing all the emotional planning. You're thinking about where this is going. You're thinking about what you should say. You're thinking about the next date. You're thinking about how to bring the spark back. Meanwhile, she may not be doing anything to move the relationship forward. And that's where you have to ask yourself a very difficult question. Am I trying to create a future with someone who isn't participating in creating it with me? That's not an accusation. It's a reality check, because you deserve a relationship where interest doesn't exist only inside your imagination. You deserve a connection where both people contribute. And if someone repeatedly shows you that they don't want to move closer, respecting that doesn't make you weak. It makes you emotionally mature. This is where many people make their biggest mistake. They think the answer is to become more impressive, more successful, more attractive, more mysterious, more unavailable, more persistent. They start treating relationships like a game where the right strategy will unlock another person's feelings. But you cannot strategy your way into genuine mutual desire. You can improve yourself. You can communicate better. You can become more confident. You can become emotionally healthier, but you cannot control another person's feelings. And once you understand that, something changes inside you. Because suddenly, the goal isn't to convince someone to choose you. The goal is to recognize whether you are both choosing each other. And this brings us to the deepest lesson of the entire video. Sometimes the answer isn't hidden in another sign. Sometimes the pattern itself is the answer. Ride that again in your mind. The pattern itself may be the answer. If she occasionally gives you attention, but consistently avoids meaningful connection, look at the pattern. If she sometimes responds warmly but repeatedly makes you feel unwanted, look at the pattern. If she says she's busy but never creates another opportunity, look at the pattern. If you are constantly initiating while she rarely participates, look at the pattern. If you spend more time interpreting her behavior than actually enjoying the relationship, look at the pattern. Because confusion can become addictive. You keep searching for one more clue, one more message, one more conversation, one more chance. You tell yourself, maybe tomorrow will be different. And tomorrow becomes next week. Next week becomes next month. And suddenly you've spent an enormous amount of emotional energy trying to solve a relationship that the other person may no longer be trying to build. That's when you need to stop asking, how can I make her want me? And start asking, why am I chasing someone who isn't consistently reciprocating? That question changes everything, because your worth is not determined by whether one particular woman chooses you. Her lack of interest does not make you less valuable. Her distance doesn't mean you're unworthy of love, and her decision doesn't determine your future. Sometimes people simply aren't compatible. Sometimes feelings change. Sometimes attraction isn't mutual. Sometimes timing isn't right. And sometimes the healthiest thing two people can do is accept that reality without turning it into hatred or resentment. You don't have to punish her. You don't have to make her regret losing you. You don't have to disappear, hoping she'll come running back. You don't need revenge. You need clarity. You need boundaries. And most importantly, you need enough self-respect to stop begging for something that should have some level of mutuality. Walking away isn't about proving that you're more powerful. It's about recognizing that your time, attention, and emotional energy are valuable too. The strongest version of you isn't the man who can convince anyone to stay. It's the man who can accept the truth without losing himself. So if you've recognized some of these patterns in your own life, don't panic. Don't immediately assume the worst. Look at the full context. Look at consistency. Look at reciprocity. Communicate when communication is appropriate. And then allow people's actions to speak for themselves, because healthy love should not require you to constantly decode, chase, convince, and prove. There should be room for effort from both sides. There should be room for curiosity from both sides. There should be room for respect from both sides. And if someone no longer wants to walk beside you, your job isn't to drag them down the road. Your job is to keep walking toward the life you want. If this video gave you a different perspective on relationships, take a moment to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever mistaken inconsistent attention for genuine interest? Your experience may help someone else recognize a pattern they're struggling to understand. And if you want more videos about relationship psychology, emotional intelligence, confidence, self-respect, and personal growth, subscribe to the channel. Remember this, you cannot control who chooses you, but you can always choose not to abandon yourself while waiting for someone else to decide. Keep building yourself, keep your standards healthy, and never confuse chasing someone with being loved by them.